NASCAR means close racing. NASCAR means pushing it to the limit. Now, you can bring all the excitement of Winston Cup racing home with NASCAR Video Magazine. Join host Benny Parsons for an in-depth study of this American institution.
So come on, let's get to it.
You'll meet the legends of the past, the stars of the present.
That's when you find out how big the Daytona 500 is.
And you'll go behind the scenes to discover the inside story on the most popular form of racing in the USA. Plus, you'll pay tribute to two of racing's immortals, Davey Allison and Alan Kowicki. It's NASCAR Video Magazine, 8 30-minute video cassettes that bring you a close-up look at racing's #1 success story. Only from Cabin Fever Entertainment.
Through his entire life, Davey Allison successfully handled the challenges and dangers that encompass stock car racing.
There it is! Davey Allison wins! Davey Allison now moves above. Mark Martin and Allison grabs the lead. Here comes Mark Martin trying to make a move off of corner number 4. It's a drag race.
Wow.
Oh, a photo finish. I think Davey Allison won, but I wouldn't say for sure.
It is ironic that his life would not end on a racetrack, but in an accident while flying a helicopter. What follows is the story of a racing superstar snatched away from all of us in his prime. A story told by his friends, family, and Davey himself.
I don't think you could ever meet a finer human being in any kind of lifestyle.
The determination, the way he accepted the losses and the mishaps.
Even when things was down and rough, he never got down.
Davey's a very sensitive person, and he had one of the biggest hearts that you could ever imagine.
He was really level-headed about what was going on in the sport, what stardom did to him.
He did all the right things a superstar should do.
We really lived out a dream, and I'm real fortunate. Davey felt real fortunate to be able to do exactly what he wanted to do.
Never wanted to do anything else, as far back as I can remember. My mom tells a story. It's not really a story, it's true, but I used to get kept after school when I was at St. Aloysius Elementary School for drawing pictures of what I wanted my race car to look like while I should be doing my schoolwork. And my teachers would keep me after school and make me do my classwork, and then they'd bring me home. And my mom tells everybody that she told one of the teachers that if she wanted me to count apples, turn those apples into race cars and I could count them. I really never thought of it any different as just being an ordinary kid with an ordinary dad. The only difference was my dad's name showed up in the newspapers sometimes, and he was on TV every once in a while, and you know, I heard his name on the radio occasionally, but other than that, you know, to me it was no different until after I was grown up. Now I realized, you know, there is something different here.
He was a really fun child for me, you know. I have said a lot of times that a lot of fathers would like to be able to have a child like Davey, you know, a son like Davey, because from early on, he was really focused. You know, he talked about going racing from way, way early age, you know, and he raced the tricycles and the bicycles and the wagons and those kind of things as he got on up. But then one day he got to the point where it was time to quit talking about racing and start working toward it, and he did that.
He was born with the Allison name to Bobby and Judy in Hollywood, Florida, on the eve of his father's first Daytona 500. David Carl Allison was born with racing in his blood, but his ascent to Winston Cup stardom was not as easy as one might have thought. For an Allison earned his way to the top by working hard and learning every step of the way.
The only thing that was ever handed was opportunity. And Davey took 110% advantage of that opportunity. When Davey grew up on Crescent Drive in Hueytown, it was wooded across the street, and we had made a bicycle track out there. And Davey had a purple bicycle that just was the talk of the town. And he'd win every bicycle race we had out there. We had our own flag set. We made a flag stand. Somebody was always the flagman. Davey was always Bobby Allison, and everybody else got to choose who they were after that.
You know, he was very proud of his father, which we all were. And he grew up in a hurry and learned how to learn a lot from his father. I'm sure he told him all the inside tips, but at the same time, it wasn't handed to him. He worked for it, and so that his father knew that if you do it the hard way, you'll remember how you got there.
Well, my dad taught me early on that if you earned something, you did appreciate it better. And, you know, if you went ahead and worked for what you wanted instead of somebody giving you the opportunity or the equipment or part of it or anything, that really it was a better way to move into a situation that you want to be a long-term situation.
I never felt any pressure from being Bobby Allison's son. You know, I had a tremendous opportunity to work in his shop, to learn from him, and then he let me use his shop to work on my own race cars between the times that I was working on his, and really gave me a tremendous head start on this sport. I never let the name Bobby Allison have an impact on me as far as a negative or pressure. I let that be a plus. The Peach Fuzz gang was kind of dubbed on me by my dad, or on us by my dad, because the oldest one in the group was Randy Hill. He was 19 years old. I was 19 years old, and none of us were shaven. When we traveled around in the early 1980s as the Peach Fuzz gang, that to me will always be, you know, a tremendous bunch of memories, because there was a group of kids that traveled around all over the Southeast running some all-pro races. We went and ran a couple of ARCA races, and people would watch us roll into the racetrack and they would just laugh. It was like a comedy show until the race started, and then it wasn't a comedy anymore. It was for real. And when we leave there, everybody joke about it being the Peach Fuzz gang, but they'd say, those guys come here to race.
We were going to Nashville one night, and we were laughed at just about everywhere we came into. Well, here come these kids again. Well, we were late, as usual, getting there. We had some trouble with the truck getting up there, so we unloaded the car right off the truck. We didn't get to practice or anything. We qualified in the top 5. We led a lot of the race, and we finished 4th. And I think that's when the Peach Fuzz gang was really noticed that, hey, we're going to have to race these kids every week.
They had that dream and that outlook that, yeah, we can affect how this thing does. And Davey had that. You know, Davey said, I can get better. And, you know, so it was more of a sidestep for me and a chance to stop a minute and smile.
His fellow competitors, they weren't laughing long at this bunch, as Davey finished 5th in his first race on April 22nd, 1979 in Birmingham. He was driving a 1972 Chevy Nova that he had borrowed from his Uncle Donnie. 5 races later, he'd win as Father Bobby watched from the pits, and that caught the attention of the entire Alabama racing community, including an up-and-coming young crew chief. His name, Larry McReynolds.
When Davey first come along, I really thought he was just Bobby Allison's son that was trying to be a race car driver, you know. I mean, he was peeling the fence down pretty regular at Birmingham. But the thing that I did admire about him was he'd peel that fence down, he'd go back to Hueytown and work night and day the next week and piece it back together and come back and give it his all again. And it's like finally all of a sudden, rather than peeling the fence down or going through the grandstands, all of a sudden, wow, Davey won, you know. And it's like he won again. And then all of a sudden, I realized that he wasn't just Bobby Allison's son trying to follow in his dad's footsteps. He was Davey Allison that was probably going to be a pretty good race car driver.
Encouraged by that early success, Davey continued on his quest to become a Winston Cup driver. By April 1983, he earned his first superspeedway pole and win in an ARCA race at Talladega. By the end of 1985, he'd proven himself on the ARCA circuit, becoming the series' all-time leader in superspeedway poles and wins. In all, he'd win 45 short track features while waiting for his big break to happen. His first chance came in the Busch Series in 1983. It was a 25th place finish, but he was there. Then in '84, Hoss Ellington gave Davey a chance to prove himself at Talladega. Incredibly, he'd finished 10th. 2 years later, he'd really turn heads as he took over Neil Bonnett's ride in Junior Johnson's car. Allison would start 7th, lead twice, and finish 7th, leaving a lasting impression on all who witnessed his run, including future car owner Robert Yates.
We had two names on the table, Rusty Wallace and Davey Allison. And naturally, Rusty had more experience, and he had a sponsor, Guard, I believe. And we talked to the sponsor people, and it really wasn't enough money to do the program like, Harry Ranier wanted to do it. And Harry said, "Listen, how about Davey?" I said, "Well, how about a sponsor?" Because you don't just have racing without a sponsor. And he said, "We'll get a sponsor. I've got faith in you." I said, "Well, it's awful tough, but I remember that boy can drive a race car." And certainly after that, he had driven Junior's car and Hoss Ellington's car real well. So I said, "Well, we'll do it."
That day, that phone call came, and he got the ride with Harry Ranier and got to get in a car that was capable of winning. And he got in and went to Daytona the first year and qualified on the outside pole. Was the class of the field other than the problems that they had. I knew that Davey Allison was a winner.
Unbelievably, in 1987, success seemed instant for Davey Allison, as the Ranier-Lundy race team sat on the front row for their Daytona debut, and then earned the pole at Rockingham just 1 week later, all with no sponsor. But those statistics quickly put the rookie in the headlines, while Texaco soon jumped on board.
J.T. Lundy wanted to bet me money that we wouldn't win a race, who was one of the owners, Davey just had it, Almost on the pole at Daytona, almost a Daytona win the first time out would have been too much for us. I think we would probably, I went away from there thinking they knew we were here. We didn't get so much confidence that we won't be any good, and it just worked out pretty good for us.
When you really thought about it, and then knowing what kind of race car he climbed into, which was the 28 car with Robert Yates engines, when you really thought about it, I guess it really didn't surprise you, but he did. He come along and sat on the front row the first race. The second race he run at Rockingham, he sat on the pole. And then, as you said, by the end of May, he was a two-time winner, and that was pretty impressive.
But a rookie still has a rather steep learning curve, no matter how much instant success they have had. And Davey was no exception, as fast as he was on the pole in Daytona. At Darlington, a track notorious for giving drivers a lesson or two, his hopes for a first victory literally went up in flames as he and his father crashed at the track too tough to tame.
I think we were running like 5th or 6th when he got in the corner too hard and crashed a couple of other cars, and his dad was involved in the accident. He came off the banking, and at that time they had some old wood poles and a guardrail, and he slid right through there, and it tore the whole back of the gas tank out. Well, he's talking to me while he's spinning. He says, "Man, I'm crashing hard." And that's the last thing I ever hear. I look over there and I see this big ball of flame going up and hear this explosion, and the spotter's going crazy, so the car's burning up. So we take off running, and the smoke is so bad, I run right past Davey, and the firemen are grabbing me, and I'm all tore up and everything, and he comes down there and grabs me, you know, and we hugging each other.
But it was an awful frightening experience. It was really the first major wreck that he had been in, and you know, it was almost welcome to the big time.
It would only be a little over a month from that terrifying day that Davey would actually reach victory lane, becoming the first rookie since 1981 to do so. Fittingly, that celebration took place at home, where so many of his past accomplishments had taken place, Talladega. But the victory would be bittersweet. As 21 laps into the race, Bobby Allison would go for the ride of his life as he flipped through the tri-oval, frightening his home crowd and his son. It was a race that would epitomize the careers of both father and son.
He called me, he says, Joy, my daddy's just died. I've seen it in the rearview mirror. He says, the whole lap. I said, look, you don't know that. It's bad, but just come on back around here and stop and get out. So I'm taking off running down there. He said, Joy, there's no way he can make it. And all he did was scream and holler and cry all the way back around there. And he come up there and slid to a halt, and his daddy's, you know, out of the car and waving at him. And
I was totally scared that the worst had happened. I watched it happen in the rearview mirror, and I knew it was going to come back down in front of a pack of cars that was moving very fast, and I just didn't see any way that they could all miss him. And fortunately, they did, for the most part. One car might have just grazed them, but, you know, that next lap, it probably only took 45 or 50 seconds to get around the racetrack that lap, but it seemed like it took an eternity. And as I came back around, my dad was climbing out of the car, and he waved to me to let me know that he was okay. And that was just tremendous relief. I was in shock, first of all. I didn't believe that he could make it through, and then I was in shock to see him climbing out of the car on his own, and tremendously relieved.
His dad okay, Davey would take his first Winston Cup checkered flag at 26 years of age.
It was totally incredible. Something that we had dreamed about for a long, long time, and to be 26 years old and to be sitting in a place like that, it just was a dream come true.
To get the first win, it was awesome. It probably didn't even sink in for a couple of days, but when we left there and went home that night, it was 10 o'clock before I got home after going through all the post-race interviews and the race being delayed for 2 hours and 45 minutes. And driving all the way home is like I kept having to force myself to drive the speed limit because I was wanting to hurry up and get back home and celebrate that win with my family and to be there with my parents, because my dad was pretty excited in victory lane too, and he was a big part of the reason why I was there.
His legendary first season continued as Davey sealed his Rookie of the Year title with another win at Dover, Delaware, when his young crew gambled on fuel mileage to earn yet another trip to victory lane, a feat that no other rookie had ever accomplished.
He had a feel for a race car, a fast feel, just a bundle of talent as far as he'd raise the hood, he'd look up underneath it, and before he'd ever go on the racetrack, so he understood the package that he was going to throw in the corner at 100 miles an hour or 200.
He grew up a lot. You know, he was always patient, but he started to get a little impatient. You know, he went to Daytona, could have won the race down there, had problems. Went to Rockingham, qualified on the pole, ran real strong when we had problems. So things were going well for being a rookie.
As 1988 approached, Davey was not content to rest on the success of the previous season. But no one could have foreseen what lay ahead. The season began with what is now a classic Daytona 500 finish, and perhaps the happiest day in Alabama gang history, and more importantly, Allison racing history, as Bobby and Davey battled for the win in the season-opening Daytona 500. It was a happy victory lane, but also testimony to the maturing youngster as he joined in his father's victory party. A moment many close to him saw as a turning point in his career.
The moment that made me start pulling for Davey Allison was when his dad beat him at Daytona and he took off running the victory lane. And what they did after that, riding around, waving at each other, and both of them were so happy for each other's accomplishments. Not being selfish, I think that right there was what a fan would say, okay, I'm gonna pull for that guy right there. You know, he's brave, but he's family oriented.
It seemed 1988 would be an Allison year.
Things really were looking good. You know, especially going into that race, we had crashed in practice on Saturday afternoon, had to stay up all night, rebuild the car. We kept making adjustments on it during the race, and then at the end, I thought I was going to get to use some of those tricks my dad had taught me and use them on him to try to win that race and set him up for what I considered to be a slingshot maneuver, and he taught me something else right there, that he didn't teach me everything that he knew, just everything that I knew. So, you know, things started off really good in 1988, and we finished second that day. Thought we would come out of the box really running good for the rest of the year, and we kind of fell on some tough times over there at Rainier Racing, and things went downhill instead of uphill. And then along came Father's Day in June, and that's when the accident of all time, as far as I'm concerned, took place.
June 1988, Pocono, Pennsylvania. Bobby Allison was looking for a second championship when disaster struck on lap 1 of the race coming out of turn 2. Bobby, involved in a crash, was hit hard and critically injured, suffering injuries that would sadly end his career. At that same moment, Davey Allison was handed family responsibilities far beyond those that a 27-year-old could imagine.
That was the most traumatic thing that had ever happened to Davey. That was his best friend, his father. I mean, anytime he needed somebody, Bobby was there. Bobby was the leader. At that time, Davey saw in that hospital that night, or the doctor came and told Davey, he says, son, you better be prepared to be the leader of this family. And I think at that point, Davey grew by leaps and bounds. He went through a lot of struggles that year, had a lot of people standing behind him and by his side. But nobody really knew deep down inside what Davey Allison was going through. But that, to me, is probably where he grew more than any.
It really didn't change my attitude about racing, but it had a tremendous effect on me personally. You know, my dad was my best friend. He and I had gotten very close. We've been traveling together a great deal. And he had, you know, we spent more time together probably over the course of 1987 and the first part of 1988 than we had in the 10 years previous. And all of a sudden that was taken away, and that hurt. You know, I could not get used to that. And to go into a racetrack and see that he wasn't a part of the field, something just didn't feel right about that. And it wasn't just me, because everybody I would talk to in the garage area would say the same thing. You know, this just ain't a Winston Cup race because Bobby Allison ain't here.
For the next 3 years, Davey would juggle his responsibilities, old and new, caring for his father, a new wife as he would marry Liz in 1989, a new family with daughter Krista Marie, while continuing his learning curve on the racetrack. He won 8 Winston Cup races and began to become one of the most popular drivers on the circuit. But in 1991, he reached new heights, mainly due to a change in personnel at what is now Robert Yates Racing, as Larry McReynolds became crew chief and leader of the team. With a new team effort, the 28 car came together and became a contender consistently each and every week. When 1991 was over, Davey had led more races, 23, and more miles, over 1,800, than any other driver on the tour. He won 6 races, including the prestigious Winston, en route to a 3rd-place finish in the points. In the meantime, he'd become a father again, as his son Robbie was born. When historians closed the book on 1991, Davey Allison was a superstar on and off the racetrack.
The two things that I really enjoyed working with Davey and admired and made my job a lot easier is even when things was down and rough, even when we could not find one hand with the other at the racetrack, he still had the same aggressiveness and the same attitude about, we'll figure it out, we'll get it. Probably the other thing, and you hadn't seen a lot of drivers in Winston Cup come along that is this way. If on that day that car was only 70%, he somehow found that other 25 to 30%. If it was only 60%, he might not find the whole 40. That might be asking a lot, but he would turn it from a 15th place car into a 6th place car. And if by some way you had a 100% race car, you would do what we did on certain days like Michigan and Charlotte back in '91 and just about lead the entire race.
We got close, you know, and I think we showed that we had the material to be championship contenders from when Larry McReynolds came over until the end of the season in 1991. Finally had a group of guys put together that we were all communicating on the same level. Nobody felt like they were better than the next guy, and nobody was too good to do anything, no matter what it was, and everybody was willing to listen. And that, man, it was just a great feeling. All of a sudden, things just started falling into place. We won the Winston at Charlotte. We won the 600. We went on to win 4 more Winston Cup races in 1991, and we got to within 100 points of Dale at one point, chasing him down for the championship. And then we had a problem at Bristol that set us back. The radiator stopped up, then we went on to Dover, and we lost an engine there, and that put us back to 3rd. And we felt like from that point on, what we needed to do was race hard, try to win some races, and get ourselves ready for 1992.
As the 1992 season approached, people expected a championship from Davey and his Robert Yates crew.
When the '91 season ended, you know, we had to go through the winter of all the ink and the press saying 1992 Winston Cup champions. We might as well go ahead and give it to them. It's over with now. They'll probably win all the races. But we knew in our heart that it was not going to be easy. And the scariest part about the '91 season ending was, can we carry it into '92? It's no different than a football team that wins a Super Bowl. Boy, they hate to see it end, because are you going to lose that momentum just through the winter time? But together we knew, as long as we kept our nose to the grindstone and kept this team pulling like it had been pulling, that we would pick our momentum up and just continue right on, and we did.
Right from the start, they didn't disappoint, as Davey avoided a 17-car crash and took control of the Daytona 500.
I'm glad everybody gives me credit for being so smart and making all these tremendous moves. The only thing I did is I really didn't feel like they could make it through turn 2, 3 abreast. You know, no matter who was there. Didn't matter if it was Bill, Sterling, and Ernie, or if it was Dale, Rusty, and Mark. I just don't think 3 cars were going to make it through there 3 abreast. So I backed off and waved off the car that was behind me. And when they tangled, I saw which way they were headed, and I just turned to miss them. And as I went by, the hole closed up behind me. The only other one that made it through right then was Morgan, and everybody else had to pick their way real careful.
Back to a subject we talked on earlier, learning curve of Davey Allison. I think at that juncture right there, sure, that halfway $10,000 lap was just a few laps away. And it was obvious that 3 or 4 of those top 6 was going to wreck or win that money. And I think Davey Allison smelled that happening, because 2 laps prior to that, he come on the radio and said, I sure don't like what I see going on. But with the restrictor plates at Daytona, you can't really back off the gas, fall back a little bit and get back in line. If you do that, you'll end up at the tail end of the line. But he was smart enough to keep a close enough watch on them top 2 or 3 to know what was fixing to come down. And he cracked the throttle and turned the steering wheel just enough, I think, to avoid it, where I think if it had been 1 Daytona 500 sooner, more than likely, probably, we'd have been right in the middle of it because we would have tried to win that $10,000 or wreck along with them.
It would be the second time a father-son duo had won the Daytona 500 as Davey joined three-time winner Bobby in victory lane. But little did he know that the most challenging and tumultuous season of his career was about to begin.
We stayed consistent. You know, we finished second at Rockingham in the second race, and then we had a streak of fourth place finishes, 3 races in a row, and went to Bristol and crashed. You know, and we thought, man, this is really going to set us back. Well, even though we crashed at Bristol, we didn't lose the point lead. And then we came back the following week at North Wilkesboro and won. Crashed at Martinsville, bruised the right lung, you know, and that was the second car that we had totaled in 3 weeks. 2 of our best cars were gone. We knew it was going to set us back a little bit, have to replace those 2 cars, but we felt like that the way things have been going, that we still didn't lose the point lead. We'd go back to the shop, build new cars to replace them, and that we'd be okay. And then we went on to Talladega and ended up in victory lane again. You know, it was like crash one week, win the next, crash the next week, win the next.
It just seemed like we'd be fast and wrecked. You know, we would just, maybe we were, you know, Davey and I never really discussed this, but it's not like we were driving up on the edge and very unsafe. We were just, I mean, I could go back through all the incidents, and there was a reason for each incident.
In the middle of those ups and downs, Davey would lose one of the forces behind his ascent in NASCAR racing, his grandfather, affectionately known as Pop. A sore and beat-up Allison would dedicate his win to Pop in an emotional victory lane. As May began, Davey dominated again at Talladega and found himself in the running for the Winston $1 million bonus because of his win at Daytona, coupled with the win at the Winston 500. A Charlotte victory would give him the bonus. His first challenge, however, would be a second consecutive win in the Winston All-Star event, where the events of the first third of the season came to a violent head.
It all started, you know, about 2 laps prior to the finish. We had a pretty good car that night. We had won the first segment and led every lap. We had sat on the pole and led all 30 laps. The second segment, by virtue of the invert process and not quite being as good as we was the first segment, we ended up, I think, about 5th or 6th. And with 10 laps shootout, you know, I told Davey during the break, you know, if we can win this race, that's great, but we got a good race car. One of the most important races of the season is coming up next week. Let's just take what it'll give us, and we'll go from there. And if that's winning it, that's fine, but don't get yourself in trouble. And he agreed with me. And it looked like with 2 to go, we was going to finish 3rd, and that was okay. We had won plenty of money that night with winning the first segment and sitting on the pole. But again, going back to the competitiveness of Davey Allison and really this entire team, it seemed like all of a sudden that last lap, we was catching up, and then them boys got in trouble. And it would have been easy for Davey to have backed off and finished second, and would have been worth a lot of money to this race team. But I would not want to see the results no different. Just like Davey Allison said, if he had to do it all over again, he'd do it the same way.
I knew that we were going to crash just as soon as the 2 cars touched the final time. And I knew that we were going to hit the outside wall, and I grabbed a hold of the steering wheel as hard as I could. But still, a 175 mile an hour impact on the left side that's a pretty serious impact. And to be honest with you, I shouldn't have walked away from that. I shouldn't have been able to get out of that car with assistance from others, and be alert of what was going on, and only have to spend the night in the hospital one night. That's a pretty serious impact, and I was pretty lucky that night.
Well, I took off running. We had the end pit, and I was the first one to the car. And I seen him in there all laid over, and I pulled the top off the fire extinguisher and was getting ready to pull it because the front of the car was on fire. Not real bad, but he was knocked out. I really thought I'd lost my buddy. But he had these old big veins in his neck, and them old things, they just pumping and everything, and the rescue squad comes over and you know, he's alive. I'm sure he's busted up pretty bad. So we ended up cutting the roof and all that off and went and stayed in the hospital with him. And, he was at the racetrack on Wednesday, ready to go.
That crash didn't stop the Allison Express, as they'd be consistent through June, even dominant at times, as they won Michigan for win number 5. Then there was a July day at Pocono. Davey had been showing his dominant form again and was making his way through the pack of cars after a pit stop, when everything went silent.
The biggest thing that made it scary was our spotter was the only member of our race team that knew what had happened and how bad it was, because it happened on the back side. All of a sudden I see Robert, he's white as a ghost, and it's because he's hearing what these other drivers is saying about the car and about Davey.
I have a scanner on that I scan other teams. So I'm starting to hear the driver drive-by views of what's going on, and I didn't want to hear those. You know, I mean, I heard them, and I heard Mark Martin say, I don't know if it's all right to say this, but, you know, he said that, you know, Davey, it doesn't look like Davey made it. And I'm telling you, I mean, I almost went through the asphalt, you know, just almost fell over the wall. I dropped my radio. I really didn't know which way to go. And I started heading out toward the back to the garage. You know, and I think I dropped my scanner, and that still was hanging on the wire, and I picked it back up, and maybe they're wrong, you know, and I figured, you know, it's real bad. It was bad, but, you know, I already knew it was terrible. And as I get to the infield care center, this record driver comes up to me, and he grabs me and he says, "Davey's fine." I said, "He's fine, you know." I said, "Great." He said, "Yeah, Davey's be fine, because Davey's okay." And I said, "Good, you know, it was a bad report I heard from Mark." And but actually what they were doing were covering up the cameras, I think, with some of the blue tarps.
I think all of us have a tendency that when things are going our way and it just seems like you can't do anything wrong, you get to taking some things for granted, almost feeling like we're bulletproof. And I guess this year I was probably a little bit guilty of that. You know, everything I touched seemed to turn to gold, so to speak. You know, took flying lessons in helicopters, got my helicopter license. We won the Daytona 500. We were leading the point standings in the Winston Cup circuit for the first time. We won the Winston, first time that anybody ever did that back-to-back. It just seemed like everything we did was going our way, and all of a sudden you get to taking too much for granted, and then an accident like what happened at Pocono brings you back down to earth, makes you realize we're all human and we're all very vulnerable.
It was an accident that would change Davey's entire perspective on life.
He became a lot more involved with the family. Less personal appearances, less time away, less of the things that will draw your family apart in the sport if you let it.
Before his accident at Pocono, I think we both took a lot of things for granted. You know, we were young, we had a beautiful family, and it was like everything that he reached out to grab, he just would reach out and grab it. And it's really hard to put all of that into perspective. And when his accident at Pocono happened, I think we realized how quickly it could be taken away from you.
I flew up to Pocono Monday night and spent the week in the hospital with Davey. And here we are, 30 years old. We've been on top of the world. We've had a great season. And we're doing everything we want to do. I mean, life can't really be any better. We've got new children, and just everything's falling into place. And something like this happens. We sat in the hospital and really reflected on what life was all about. You know, life had changed a bunch.
By looking back on it now, I think, yeah, maybe there was something being sent to me, you know, through the little wrecks at Daytona in practice. Here in the race, Martinsville, Charlotte, Sears Point. You know, something was trying to tell me something along the way, and then in Pocono, wake up, you know, open your ears, open your eyes. And, you know, I don't know what the future holds, but whatever it is, I'm going to try my best to do it right.
Just 6 days later, incredibly, he was back in the race car. Bobby Hillin would qualify the car third, but Davey would drive 5 laps at Talladega before yielding to Hillin during a rain shower.
He never showed weakness or signs that, well, this has happened, so we'll just have to kind of take it easy and then we'll get on with it. And he showed that at Talladega, I think, by getting in a car that we had to Velcro his hand to the shift lever where he could shift the gears. And I'll always believe that day, I mean, on a hot and humid day like that day at Talladega, and we needed a caution to get Davey out of that car, you pray for it, but you do it in a manner that I hope nobody has misfortune, and we get a 3-minute rain shower. It's a pretty good sign from God, I think.
I can't think of anything that was as hard for me as putting him back in that car at Talladega after Pocono. He was so broken up and hurt. I mean, he laid in the bed and he moaned and groaned. He'd had several major surgeries a couple of days before that, and I was totally against that. And you know, I told him, you know, if you love me, you won't get back in this race car. And he said, if you love me, then you'll support me in this race car. And so that's what I did. And when it was all over, I was glad that he did that. I think he proved something to himself and to everybody else.
I wasn't real sure of the magnitude of the injuries and the effect on the person until I got there Monday night. But the determination when I got there in his eyes was, Tommy, I'm going to be in that race car Sunday. Well, Tuesday, as things started to wear off and that pain started to set in, he wasn't real sure of himself at that time. But that determination kept driving him. And come Wednesday morning, Thursday, each day it got to be a little bit stronger, and he was going to be in that car Sunday, no matter what it took. We got to the racetrack Saturday morning, and the people that were around and come to greet him. I mean, his fellow competitors, all the people involved, it was just a tremendous feeling. When he got in that car, his deal was to get in the car, make the 1 lap, and get out so he can start the race on Sunday. Well, he got in that car and made 4 or 5 laps out by himself and ran pretty decent laps. And then the next lap he comes by in a group of 7 or 8 cars in the draft. And I mean, just the tears started running in everybody's eyes that this guy is not going to be slowed down by anything.
As the healing process continued, somehow Davey maintained the points lead in his quest for his first ever Winston Cup title.
Davey was, he was pretty good as a brother. We had our competitions and we had our fights. I don't think anything was out of the ordinary, but he had things that he liked to do and I had my things.
As the final third of the season continued, a battered Davey Allison headed to Michigan, a place he had dominated in past runs. While he was en route to the race, brother Clifford was practicing for his qualifying run in a Busch Grand National event at the Speedway when tragedy struck. Clifford would not survive his accident. An emotionally stunned Allison arrived at the track trying to erase the pain and move on towards his own championship dreams. But there was nothing he could do but remember his brother. Despite his grief, Davey climbed into his race car on Sunday, seeking comfort the only way a stock car driver knows how: racing.
I didn't understand that then as much as I do now. I had a problem with that myself. I didn't understand why we didn't just pack our bags and go home. You know, we got the news that Clifford died before we even left Birmingham. We were at the airport, headed that way. And we had a long discussion about that, but he felt like that Clifford would want him to go on and do what he'd worked hard to do, and at the time he was in the championship battle which, you know, he just felt that he'd worked too hard to get to that point and that Clifford would be disappointed in him. And I can understand that a lot more now from what I've had to deal with since Davey's death.
There was a lot of people that questioned Davey for what he did in August that year. And the best thing Davey could have done was be in that race car. That was the best therapy that he had. And even through his dad's deal in '88, the best therapy was getting in that race car. He can pretty well wipe out anything in his mind and go do his job.
If you sit back and look at all the negative things and all the things that have gone wrong, you can drag yourself down. And I've never had the type of personality to do that. I've always been the kind of person that look at the bright side of everything and try to make something positive out of even the worst situations. And, you know, Clifford's death, it hit close to home and it hit awful hard. But the thing about it was he wasn't working at a job that he didn't like. He was doing what he enjoyed, and we all know what the dangers are and what the risks are before we ever fasten the seat belts and the shoulder harnesses. And that part of it makes me happy, that I know that he might have died, but he died happy.
Another competitor might have thrown up their hands in frustration and given up entirely, but not Davey. He moved on, taking each challenge as it came, even finishing 5th at Michigan that trying weekend, displaying a trait that runs deep in the Allison veins, an inner strength handed down through each generation.
Davey's determination was his real strength. You know, just a setback was only a temporary setback to him. You know, just came right back, and you know, we saw him in a lot of races where he'd have some early problem and fall way behind, and he just would never give up.
The rest of the 1992 season continued to be turbulent, including his last chance at the Winston $1 Million bonus at Darlington. After leading 72 laps, he was in an excellent position to earn the win and the cash until a rain shower shortened the race after he pitted for fuel. He'd finish 5th. Davey wouldn't win again until Phoenix in November, where he regained the points lead over second-place Alan Kulwicki by a slim 30. Despite the pressure, Davey continued to smile.
We hadn't won since June in Michigan, and even we hadn't had very strong performances. And we'd been through so much besides the injuries, besides the tore-up cars. We go into Darlington with a chance to win $1 million, have a car that's strong enough to do it, and the rain bites us. So the rain helped us in July, but it bit us hard in September. But then we finally, it's like Phoenix was finally that turning block that finally said, okay, I think Davey's recovered and everything's back on track. We got our cars back where we need to have them. We're okay now. And we approached Atlanta with the same attitude that we had approached every race. I mean, we didn't take it no different. We felt fortunate to be in that situation, and if it was God's will, we'd win it. If it wasn't, then we just would get ready to try to win the '93 championship.
As Atlanta approached, the tension mounted. Davey would have to finish 6th or better to become Winston Cup champion. Running 6th with less than 100 laps to go, Davey was caught in an accident when Ernie Irvan blew a tire, thus gashing his title dreams. As he waved to the crowd in thanks, Allison handled the situation like a champion.
We didn't get it, so we'll just go back and we'll get ready for next year and we'll come out and try again. It just wasn't meant to be.
You know, that's the type of attitude and outlook he exemplified in everything he did. And you know, after we wrecked, and it would have been easy for us to have packed our stuff up, throwed it in the truck, and said to heck with it. When we put that car back out there, I didn't go back to the pits. I went and stood on top of the trailer. And those last 50 laps, watching that car ride around there with no front end and no side, it just I kind of reflected. I said, you know, this is kind of how our whole year has went, but at least we're going out and fighting and scrapping till the last checkered flag of the last race. And again, I think it made a big statement about Davey and our entire race team about, you know, that we just don't give up. No matter what you throw at us, we're going to keep clawing back.
As 1993 started, hopes for another title shot began for Davey and his Texaco Haviland crew. By the Richmond race weekend, they already had tallied a victory and just about seemed ready to hit their stride as July began. Tragically, it would come to a sudden end on July 13th, when the helicopter Davey was piloting crashed, ironically, at the place where he was most successful, Talladega Superspeedway, leaving his loved ones only with their cherished memories.
I knew Davey had a strong fan following. That day in July when those people lined the streets and lined the interstate and the cards, the letters, the phone calls, I had no idea the impact that he had put on people's lives.
He had that mischievous deal, you know, if he knew somebody was jumpy, he'd walk up and goose them and, you know, or throw something at them, or somebody that was afraid of a bug, you know, he'd throw that kind of a bug at him. That never did leave him. He was that way right up till the very end.
It didn't matter what Davey did, he did it with 100%. Whether it was driving a race car, whether it was trying to plot to come around and goose me, or whether it was sitting down eating dinner, he always did it with full concentration, determination, and full effort.
He knew what he wanted to do, and he did it. All the doors weren't open for Davey Allison because of his father's. He knocked a lot of them down.
The entire time I worked with Davey, and never had a doubt from him, never had an argument. The best memory I've got with Davey Allison, we never had an argument.
Well, I'm proud of him for a lot of things, but I think I'm most proud of him for just being the gentleman that he was.
If I could be remembered as a friendly person and a person who took time out for others around him, that would be more than enough to satisfy me.